invite the children forward.
Now this is going to sound like a really strange question, but what do you use a teacup for? Drink orange juice. Drink orange juice. There's always one in it. His answer in the other congregation was eat bananas. He decided to change that. Well, we drink tea, right? Now, what do you drink tea out of home? No, if you were having tea at home, what would you drink it out of? A mug, right? We always drink our tea out of mugs, right? Nice big mug, nice heavy, nice to heat in, you know? Now, when I'm visiting with somebody and they get a fancy teacup and we have tea together, it brings back some memories for me because my grandmothers always used to drink their tea out of fancy cups. They rarely drink their tea out of mug. And so, whenever I use a teacup, it brings back a memory of my grandmothers. And did you ever notice that we're having tea with these cups? Like, where do we put the pinky? We have the mugs. That's the full drink. So, I'm drinking tea and I think about my grandmothers because it reminds me of a time with them, of time I spent with them, of conversations I had. So there's lots of things like that in our lives, isn't there, that remind us of other people, that remind us of good times or happy times? He's got it covered up now, but he has a AC/DC t-shirt on. That reminded me of some times in the past that I'm not going to share. But what things in your life perhaps remind you of something, or remind you of a person, or remind you of an event in the past? Can you think of anything?
Smells.
Just put it on.
The smell.
Smell, a certain smell. He's on this orange juice. One other thing for me is the cooler, which sounds really strange. But when I see a big cooler, I think of family trips because we went to Florida almost every year because of family that live in Florida. And then we go on other trips as a family too. Except whenever we went on a trip to cut costs, we always had a cooler with us, right, with sandwiches and water and juice and those kinds of orange juice. But a cooler, whenever I see a cooler, it kind of reminds me of family road trips. So these things, they help us remember things. Now, in our gospel story today, we have two disciples, one named Cleopas and the other we don't have a name for. But the two disciples are walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus, a village called Emmaus. And it was about 7 miles away. But it would have been 7 miles is fairly far for us to walk. They were used to walking to get where they were going. But Emmaus was like up and down, hot, dry, dusty. So they were on the road to Emmaus, and this was basically Easter Sunday, the afternoon of Easter Sunday. And so they were walking to Emmaus, and they were kind of down because Jesus had died on the cross. They had buried him in the tomb. And they're walking out of Jerusalem to Emmaus. They're thinking about everything that's happened. They've heard some rumors that the tomb was empty. What did it mean? They weren't sure. And as they're walking on the road, a person joins them on the trip and starts to walk beside them. And so they start talking to each other. And they asked him what he thought of all the things that were happening in Jerusalem. And the stranger said, "What things?" And they're like, "You haven't heard?" And so they started to tell him all about Jesus and about all the teaching that he did and how wonderful he was. And then they talked about how he was arrested and put to death, and now that the tomb is empty. And Jesus proceeded to talk to them and had a great time on the road as they learned from each other, as they talked to each other. And finally, they got to the inn where they were going, and Jesus looked like he was going to walk on. And the two disciples said, "No, please, stay with us. Come in, it's getting late." And so Jesus went into the inn with them, and they had supper together, and Jesus blessed the bread and he broke it. And when he did that, suddenly the disciples recognized him. They realized who they had been sharing their time with. But when they kind of snapped out of that amazement, they realized that Jesus was gone. And they turned to each other and they said, "How could we not have known him? Weren't our hearts burning within us as we were walking on the road talking to him?" It was like that old feeling we had when Jesus was with us. Isn't it amazing what simple objects, a cup, bread, what things, how they remind us about how people love us, about how people in our families or in our church, of how we're reminded that we are loved and that we are not alone. So when we're not feeling good about ourselves, when we're down, we've had a bad day, a bad week, sometimes it's these familiar things that help remind us that we're part of something larger, that we are loved and cared for. Sometimes these are really important. Let's pray together. Dear God,
Dear God,
we thank you for Jesus.
we thank you for Jesus.
We thank you for his great love for us.
We thank you for his great love for us.
We thank you that so many people love and care for us too.
We thank you that so many people love and care for us too.
Remind us,
Remind us
through objects, through actions,
through actions,
through words, that we are loved.
that we are loved.
We ask this in Jesus' name.
We ask this in Jesus' name.
For those that want to do this, Our gospel reading this morning is taken from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" And he asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. This week we have another one of those well-known and much-loved stories of Jesus. It's a great story. It's a story that many of us can identify with. The act of physical journey, the act of spiritual journey, companions on the road, sitting in the midst of confusion and loss, and some way, somehow, someone helps to put a different perspective on it for us, helps us to see it in a new way or to understand it a little more deeply. That's one reason why I love this story. But I also love it because of the 4 words that pop up in the middle of the story. 4 words that I think are among the most heartbreaking yet the most realistic in all of Scripture. But we had hoped. But we had hoped. So much is said in those 4 small words. They speak of a future that is not to be. They speak about a dream that created energy and enthusiasm, but failed to materialize. They speak of a promise that created faith that proved to be false. It speaks of a future that is now kind of closed off. It's irrelevant. It is dead. And there are few things more tragic than a dead future. Ernest Hemingway was once challenged to write a short story in 6 words, and it's rumored that he wrote it on the back of a napkin. Of course, he liked to hang out in the bar, Ernest Hemingway, but it's rumored that he wrote it on the back of a napkin, those 6 words, his short story. For sale, baby shoes, never used. It's not just the tragedy of what happens that hurts. It's the gaping hole of all that could have happened, of all that should have been. That's what really hurts. These words were made very real to me last night when I returned home from a couple of days in Niagara celebrating my 50th birthday. We had a wonderful time, by the way. Thank you so much for the well wishes. I got home, I turned on Facebook to read the many birthday wishes from friends, to catch up on their lives about what had happened with them while I had been away. And I discovered that a good friend from high school had died quite unexpectedly and quite suddenly in Thailand. He had moved there about a year ago to teach at a university, leaving a professorship in chemical engineering at a university in southern Georgia, and a broken marriage. He had left, he had gone there. And reading between the lines last night and the posts from some of the people and chatting on Facebook with my friend's current partner in Thailand, I am sure that my friend took his own life. He was brilliant. He was gifted, he was funny, but he went through a number of ups and downs in his life. He had some very dark periods. I had not physically seen him since high school, but we had talked a few times over the years, and he seemed happy in Thailand. So much promise, so much hope, new beginnings, new opportunities. But we had hoped.
I love those heartbreaking words, not because I enjoy wallowing in the darkness and the feelings of grief and loss, but because they ring true to me, to my experience, and I'm sure ring true to your experience too. They are not the only truth, of course. There is so much in this life that is beautiful and daring and confident and inspiring, all of which deserves our gratitude. But there is also disappointment, there is also heartache, there is also failure, and like my friend, we all too often gloss over it, don't we? We remain stuck in one or the other. And if we don't gloss over it, we at least feel the pressure to move on, to move by it too quickly, to some kind of resolution, fleeing the cross-like experiences of our life for the promise of the resurrection. And we do this not only in daily life, we also do it in the church. How quickly we move from Good Friday to Easter Sunday. A friend shares the news of the death of a family member, and we sympathize for a moment before changing the topic. Or a colleague shares her disappointment at not getting a promotion, and we remind her that at least she has a job. Or we see an acquaintance we know who has just gone through a dreadful loss, and we avoid him altogether. Not because we don't care, but because we just don't know what to say. We don't mean to be callous. We don't mean to be insensitive. We are just at such a loss with loss. We feel inadequate to the task of confronting the darkness in our lives, or even worse, the darkness in other people's lives. And so we flee to the light in denial. It's understandable, after all. We are people of the resurrection. And so when we are reading this story, for example, we often hurry to the burning hearts part instead of thinking about the loss, but we had hoped. There is resurrection, but there is also a cross. So I'd also say that before we get to the burning hearts part, we experience the broken hearts part. And how we get through that, how we are helped through that, helps us truly appreciate and enjoy the burning hearts part. Can we be a place that welcomes broken hearts? And it sounds far easier than it is. Because I'm not talking about treating our broken hearts as a means to an end. Like, let's acknowledge the cross before we get on to the resurrection. But I'm talking about recognizing that our lives, that part and parcel of what it is to be human is to be broken. How long will I think about my friend before I move on? I sent a few messages on Facebook back and forth with his partner in Thailand, trying to support her. But it was not just the distance or the fact that it was typed on Facebook that made it difficult. I didn't know what to say. And I'm the one that's supposed to have the words. And so it is to these heartbroken disciples in our gospel today. It is to those among you sitting in the pews who are heartbroken in your own way today, even on Facebook. It is to these people who are heartbroken that the risen Christ comes, walking along with us on that road, astonished perhaps that we can't see it yet, that we can't see him yet, teaching us as he goes. sharing his presence through gifts like bread and wine, ways that help us recognize him, and granting us the burning hearts that bring us back to life. But all of it starts with broken hearts. And our job as Christians, our job as followers of Christ, our job as I see it, is to get people to admit to their darkness, to listen, to be there with them on their journey, not to rush them to the burning hearts, but to help them live through the broken hearts. Some are not ready to do so, and they will not be persuaded by you or by me. And the ones who carry this with them daily, almost like a snail carries its shell, they don't need to be convinced. They only need to be invited. They only need to be allowed to feel what they are currently feeling, but to know that they are not alone. Invited and allowed to share their disappointment, perhaps that cancer has returned, that an addiction has not been overcome, that a beloved one has died, that a lover has betrayed them, that a child has walked away, that the job didn't materialize, that the congregation is disappointed, that the family is hurt instead of helped. We know those stories and many more. They only need to be invited. They only need to be allowed to grieve for a future that will never be, in order that eventually they will possibly hear, they will possibly receive the good news that God is present with them and will continue to be present with them, that God has created a future for them regardless of the past and the broken hearts, and that it is all there waiting when they are ready and when they are able. We are called to tell the two truths about broken hearts and about burning hearts, creating a space so that they might know and be known, that they might trust and be trusted, that we might listen and then speak. It is at times an all too easy promise that we preach, that Jesus just shows up in the midst of our doubt and our disappointment, that Jesus is present in our grief, that Jesus meets us where we are. It's easy to say. But are we willing to walk the road and be that presence? I don't doubt that Jesus does all of that. But what exactly does Jesus do when he shows up and interrupts this conversation on the road? He doesn't just join them on the road and continue on. Jesus gets them to articulate, to express what they are experiencing. He says, "What things? Tell me your story. Let me hear it in your words." And the response of the disciples is right on. Where have you been these last few days? They're expressing their sense of frustration. How can you not know what I've been through? And yet that question, that invitation to speak, to tell their story, leads the disciples to describe the things which they do, to name their hurt, to name their fear, to name their doubts. And then Jesus picks it up from there and brings it home. Because that's what Jesus does. That's what Jesus wants us to know today. Not just that he will show up, but that he will show up and that he will give us the time and the opportunity to speak the truth of our pain, to help us make sense of it. Perhaps a lot, but more likely just a little bit. To help us get to a place where we can see beyond what has just happened. To help us move from "but we had hoped" to "the Lord is risen indeed." Because it's a long trip between Jerusalem and Emmaus. It is hot and dusty and dry. And it feels like it's all uphill. It seems like the longest trip ever. And yet, if we are honest, that is where most of us are a lot of the time. Somewhere in between, on that journey between distress and belief, between disillusionment and acceptance, between dashed hopes and promises fulfilled. We are on our own road to Emmaus, waiting for the presence of Christ to be revealed, trusting in his presence, but impatient for his revelation. Amen.